Alright, it's me again. Another draft science, draft physics video presentation. For what purpose, it seems unknown. I show yesterday a college professor taking something that's obviously an orange and describing it as an apple. No, it's even worse than that. Just clearly not paying any attention to the actual experimental results and just telling you a whole different story as if you can't see exactly what's wrong. You can see that it's not matching. The thing he says is there isn't there. Okay, something different is there. It's an MIT professor on an experiment he called, the professor calls, nail in the coffin evidence that light is a wave. And yet he's not describing the actual experiment at all correctly. He's not accounting for it at all. And Richard Feynman, because of this experiment, because of that ability to look at it and pretend it looks like something else, pretend it's not, again, it's an obvious difference. It's just, you can't miss it kind of difference. Okay, this pattern versus seeing this pattern. You can't miss that this is not equal to this, okay? And if you have math that describes that, oh, well, this is fine, good, happy for you. But this is what you have to describe. This is what the experiment produces. This here. I guess this yellow chalk is kind of lame. Emphasizing again. Let's just emphasize the difference here. See the difference here. See this here. See, there's a big difference between the two patterns. Not the same pattern at all. No. Pause for a moment. Alright, should be back. Alright, so anyway, this is the experiment by all the physicists' description. This is what, again, it's that dramatic. Richard Feynman, if this experiment didn't exist, he might not have said God plays dice with the universe. He might have said, oh yeah, this is, something explainable. It's an understandable universe. It doesn't do all this magical woo. Particles are particles and forces are forces, and all that stuff might have occurred to all these people. So if it wasn't for the nonsensical interpretation of this experimental outcome, that this is being caused because, light has to interfere with itself and all kinds of weird stories about, single photons interfering with themselves, taking two different paths and somehow doing some kind of bizarre bullshit. All of that comes out of the fact that they didn't pay any attention to this. Because if they did, they'd say, oh yeah, well, two waves ain't going to work. Okay, two little photons splitting in two and interfering with itself isn't going to create this pattern. Okay, it might create this pattern, but it's not going to create this pattern, the one that actually happens. So, and I just get mush in the comments. I get nothing. All I'm asking is a concession that all these extraordinary claims of physics, God's playing dice with the universe, should be based on some sort of hard, good, solid evidence. And you think this is hard, good, solid evidence. Okay, a complete mischaracterization of the most cornerstone experiment in physics. And they can't, again, to save their silly theory, they can't explain it the way it actually happened, because their silly theory dies if they explain what actually happens. If they attempt to acknowledge the existence of the actual fossil, right? This is like just showing up with a Tyrannosaurus head and somebody just goes, it's a rock. Yeah, it's just a rock. That's what rocks do. Volcanoes make rocks that look like dinosaur heads. They come up with some crap. They just ignore it. They just pretend I don't have to account for it. It's a rock. People wonder why I have a bad attitude. What the fuck? Because my audience is either too fucking stupid. They can't even, like I said, you show somebody, a professor at MIT, obviously not describing something correctly. Just overtly I mean, any imbecile can see that this, uh, you know, on, off, on, off, on, off is not the same as on, off, off, on. I mean, that they're not the same pattern at all. So they could at least concede, gee, that's kind of weird that MIT professors can't see the obvious. I mean, it's right there in front of him. He's displaying it on the wall, and he's saying it's an on-off pattern that goes forever, and so on, and so on. Well, it's not and so oning. It's got a big problem. So, the imbecile should at least be able to say, gee, that's kind of weird that an MIT professor can't see that. Obviously, that doesn't match what he just explained mathematically, and that it doesn't match what he drew with two waves. Two waves can't make this complex pattern. So why is he saying it? Why is he doing that? That is kind of weird that MIT professors do it that wrong. And then I explained, well, this is a cornerstone experiment. I mean, everybody built all of quantum mechanics. All the woo of quantum mechanics started here. Well, anyway. So okay, you don't know physics, you can't even say that much. Well, that doesn't look like very good evidence. I mean, the professor shouldn't be misdescribing the evidence. You can't even say that? Nothing. Not one acknowledgement. And then the people who do know some physics, they can't concede that, gee, we should have tightened this up a little better than that. It's pretty bad when, the professors aren't accurately describing the foundational experiments. It doesn't look good, especially when the foundational experiments are dirt simple. I mean, this isn't at all complicated. It's just fucking slits in two holes in a material. And they can't be fair to it. They can't describe that experiment correctly. And then somebody wonders why I have an attitude? I'm on a fucking... what is this planet? Do I have a single rational subscriber out there? Is there one rational person in the fucking audience who can acknowledge that evidence for all these extraordinary claims should be a little tighter than this, a little better than this? That this is the shittiest evidence? You've convicted the universe of being some silly, wooey, wavical thingy, okay, on this crappy evidence. It doesn't bother you. You're all religious kooks. It's obvious. It's just I'm on a planet of people who are just incapable of dealing with reality. All right. I'm a learner. Well, what do I care? You're a commenter is what you are, okay, on a channel devoted to pretty much one purpose, proving their theory to be complete crap, as I overtly demonstrate, and my theory to be much better and superior in every way, okay, and that's the point of the channel, the truth. And you're sitting here, it's like some guy who goes to some symposium with a bunch of evidence, that in 10 years the atmosphere is going to catch on fire and everybody's going to burn to death. And he's got, and he gives you a presentation, and then some asshole in the audience gets up and says, why are butterflies pretty? Yeah. What the fuck? You're not on the subject, and your comment was so fucking stupid, even conventional physics doesn't think forces bang into forces. Newsflash. Okay? The only time they have any hint of having some notion that a force can influence another force is because they don't really understand that photons are a force, and they think that photons are some kind of special thing moving the speed of light. They're not the same as all the other forces moving the speed of light, like the electric field moves the speed of light, right? Whatever the electric field is. Yeah. And so that's making a photon. I don't really understand how they really do construct this notion of realizing that fields never interact with each other, and yet somehow photons are bent by a field. But the point is regardless, conventional physics already concedes that forces, fields, don't interact with fields until you put matter in the fields. Matter is the conduit for the forces to interact, except in the silly case of the Einstein exception for photons. So your question was moot. to this whole purpose of this channel, which is to draw a contrast between their woo theory and my rational theory. And both of us agree that your comment was useless because there's no argument. We've already done the experiment. We've crashed laser beams into laser beams and they don't affect each other. So it's not an issue, your question. So it's so trivial, and you don't see how it's a waste of my time, that you're wasting my time, that I'm not here to tutor you on, elemental, up, spelled UP. I'm not here to do all that. Okay, you have to come here with some knowledge, and if you don't have any, then shut the fuck up. All right. So it says, all right. I don't claim to be an expert. That's irrelevant again. That is why. Well, spell with a Y. See, this is sort of the problem. Okay, you want me to explain a lot of things, like why it sucks that you just type a fucking Y. This ain't Twitter. Anyway, I come here. Well, I don't care. And you bring and you are, so you spell with a U and R spell with R. Oh, being so rude. Rude. I don't know what that is. I accept my question was childish. Oh, but you don't accept that I should find it annoying that you think I should devote my channel to explaining this crap to you. Getting you up to speed to have a 6th grade conversation or a high school conversation. That's not my obligation. I'm really not interested in the common man, okay? I have no interest in persuading him of the physical truth because he doesn't have enough knowledge to know anything about it. I'm attempting to reach people who are supposed to be educated, somebody who actually has some education in physics and some knowledge of the experiments, and I'm trying to get them to answer the question. It doesn't matter that Professor Lewin mathematically described a pattern that wasn't created by the experiment. That's not an important detail. Okay. But that not is the way you should react. Fuck you. So anyway, just go away. Shut up. Or else. Yeah, we'll put it that way. So this guy says, so you want a refund. Yes, exactly. You're not getting one. Okay, we'll just remove it. Rubbish. Alright. So approved. Which, fuck you also. Okay. Light plus light equals dark, question mark. That is pure nonsense. Well, so he gets that part right, but this part will be crap. Okay. What is this? Oh, that's an exclamation point with a space in between it. Oh, that's not a good idea. No capital letter here. Light repeat itself on various medium. So you just don't get it, right? This whole bullshit of mediums is so fucking idiotic and irrelevant and superfluous and useless. And you haven't heard me say that over and over again. Light isn't a field perturbation, okay? It's energy. It is energy. It's stuff moving with momentum. It doesn't need a field. There doesn't need to be any medium. And if you make one medium, it's so irrelevant, right? It's like you're telling me that, okay, if I'm going to have a universe, I have to physically actually create a checkerboard, okay, with medium in it, okay? And, all right, I probably should have drawn that much bigger so you see the squares, okay. Now, as I pointed out, the problem with that diagram is these diagonal distances are much longer than these distances, and so it breaks down if you make it out of something. But if you don't make it out of something, if you don't bother with the checkerboard and you just have a rule that the checkers always move one full checker at a time, okay, you can do the same thing. You can create the same mechanism. You don't need these dominoes to knock over. You just have a domino that can fly, okay, and it can go to a location. It doesn't need Doesn't need to hit a bunch of other dominoes to get somewhere. There's no need for it. It's superfluous, this medium crap. And there's nothing about the photon's behavior that indicates it needs a medium. It gets from point A to point B and it goes there in a straight line. And the only thing that changes that is sticking a big piece of matter in its way. And that's it. That's what the evidence indicates. So it's superfluous to understanding whether there's a medium or not. We know that a thing, the energy, goes from point A to point B. Who fucking cares whether it mediumed there? Oh, fuck. So if it is dark, it's because there was no medium. So that makes no sense at all. If it's dark, it's for a lot of reasons. As pointed out, it can be out of phase. There can be lots of energy, but the energy isn't in a pattern that's a frequency, retard. So even your point is stupid. If I have a frequency between things that are consistent, well then it's a photon that we can see. If the frequency isn't consistent, okay, then it won't be something we can see. It won't be a photon. Okay, it's still fucking energy though, retard. I'm not here to debunk your nonsense, okay? I'm really not. Okay, I oversimplify, but you get the point. No, I don't get the point. I don't know how you watched any of my videos and would think I would like you to use the word medium somewhere, that I have some fucking interest in mediums and ethers. No, I hate that shit as a concept. It's fucking goddamn stupid. It doesn't mean anything. It can't mean anything. It doesn't serve any fucking purpose. A straight line is a straight line. It doesn't need to be drawn on a piece of paper. It doesn't have to be made out of carbon. Anyway, same thing occur when they use 3 filter and overlay them. I've already done this part too. What is it with the exclamation points? You don't know what a fucking period is? Okay, and create and rotate them. Light can't be bent or shaped easily. It can't be bent or shaped at all. It has to crash into something and be refracted or diffracted or deflected. Electromagnetic radiation, well, fucking it's nothing electric and there's no magnetic. So it's all horse shit. Though can be, what is this, massaged fairly easily. No, it can't. So that's just more horse shit. This is why I mentioned that light and electromagnetic radiation are bodies. What is it? Buddies. But they are not twin. Oh, God, it's disgusting rubbish. Or whatever. Yeah, whatever. What a pile of crap. There's nothing electrical about a photon. You can't make it do anything electrical unless it crashes into an electron. Electrons cause electricity. Electrons actually attach to atoms, to be completely fair. That's electricity, shithead. Electricity is an atomic function. There's no electric field. There's only one field, and that's the charge field. Charge, and charge is made out of these little bits moving the speed of light. Shit. Crap everywhere. Crap. So whatever this is, it looks like a fucking cowboy name, whatever, Cliffy Creek or something. We are to be persuaded that it's impossible for the current high-tech precision equipment to detect subatomic particles. I'm just saying you can't detect. To detect something means you have to some way interact with it, with some sort of thing to detect it. To detect me, you bounce light off of me. If there's no light, I'm in a completely dark room, it's pretty hard to detect me, correct? Unless I make some noise or I do something else to send you energy, pieces of information. But if I'm not sending you anything, then you're not going to know I exist. Correct, fuckhead? So what exactly do we look at the smallest things with? We smell them? What do you think we do to know they exist? When you know if you hit them with a photon, they move this, very fast away from you. Okay. But this one man has detected how the subatomic universe operates. So when Einstein detected it, with his theory of bent space, he detected how the universe operates. What great instrument was he using? What magical tool did he use? Again, I'm contrasting my theory to their theory. You understand they have a their theory, and that their theory is based on their understanding of the evidence, and I'm clearly pointing out how they can't accurately describe the evidence to save their life. And that's part of a clue that they might be wrong, is that they can't accurately describe the most fundamental experiments in the lineage of their great theory. Fuck. God, you people are just so dishonest and duplicitous. But this one man has detected how the subatomic universe operates. I've provided you a model that explains things like how a magnet works, and that a magnet's a filter, and that explains why the magnet doesn't get hot or it doesn't get smaller as it uses up energy to move. I've explained where the movement comes from, where the cause is to the effect. I've given you a model that works and is simpler. It doesn't create any entanglement. No woo. You don't have to worry about ether. Superfluous. All of that stuff goes away. And your critique is you're not allowed to have a model. You're not allowed to explain it simpler or better or more completely. You're not allowed to, draw a simple diagram just pointing out how the slit experiment can be clearly understood as a very simple thing. All right, you create a distance between 2 points. All right, and that's what a slit does. It creates a distance between 2 points, and that you can just count how many wavelengths fit inside that distance, and then you can just draw the lines for those wavelengths to over here, and it will create the same number of little lines will be created as there are wavelengths in between the distance, and that this arc is the fair arc to view what's taking place, because this equal distance, you're viewing it equidistant, and so all the little things will be exactly the same size, and this is where they're in phase, this is where they're out of phase, and there you go. The whole experiment is explaining a simple little dynamic. Count how many wavelengths are here, and then double it for the 180 degrees, and that's it. You've explained the pattern. It's a finite pattern, all right? There's a finite difference between the path length between this line and this line. They can only be in phase a certain number of times in certain definite locations, and that's all the experiment is. No woo needed. These are the point sources. This is where the photons are being scattered, okay? By plowing into electrons, they're being scattered into little pieces. The little pieces combine in different locations in phase and create new photons. There, I've given you a simple model, okay, of how the experiment works. Your model is convoluted mush, okay, sine theta. We'll pretend there's an infinite number of these things, because we'll cast it into a straight line going infinitely. Our math won't get the right answer because we're distorting the image. All the the liabilities of their explanation. Their model sucks. Their 2 waves have to be in a preposterous location, 2 waves here in the middle of this slit, for their theory to come up with any answer at all. It doesn't explain why there's a big blob here in the middle. Yeah, these are called models, asshole. Do you get it? That's just sort of the obligation of explaining how, anything happened, is you draw a model of it. Like, there's somebody got murdered, and you could draw a model of, well, this guy was in the right location, okay, and he did have blood on his hand, and, there were fingerprints on the knife, and he did have the ability to walk over here and stick the knife in this person's eye. I mean, what's wrong with modeling things, shithead? Fuck. Anyway, he operates. He should be awarded a Nobel Prize. A bad attempt at polite irony. So again, You know, people have gotten Nobel Prizes for proposing all kinds of woo, anti-particles, all kinds of wooey crap. And all of that is legitimate and great. And because you love crappy, shitty, incomplete models that don't explain anything. That explain it by saying God plays dice with the universe. You like that answer. Well, I despise it. Fuck you. Alright, some more from the craps. Alright, you've got to see this. Another account that just sounds like crap again, right? Your drawings have improved. Whatever. Scale up the fuzzy edge opening as you suggest. I did. Of the slits seems reasonable. I don't need to actually point this out. I mean, I really don't, right? I mean, if I have to point this part out, then people are really, 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 really too stupid for the conversation, because yes, it's a little bit, the world is a little more complicated than they think. That obviously I shouldn't have to tell you fuckers that yes, the slit, okay, if we were to magnify the slit, it's actually made out of fucking atoms. I mean, first, if I magnify it, I'll find out that the surface probably has some sort of shape. Okay, it's not some consistently smooth surface, but that it's actually made out of atoms. Okay, and their atoms have this feature about them where they're actually made out of little tiny electrons in positions on the outside and positive stuff here on the inside. So you're always having electrons on the outside. You know. And what we know about electrons is they scatter light. So if there's a bunch of electrons here on the outside of this surface, and maybe they're not in a perfectly straight line, because you know they're atoms, so they might have some geometry to them, a little geometricness to them. And there's a bunch of these electrons here on the surface, and some of the light is going to plow right into those electrons, and one piece of it might go that way, and one piece might go that way, and one piece goes that way, and one piece goes that way, and one piece goes that way. And by doing all that, going different directions, well, obviously the stuff going this way would end up bouncing off this other surface and going that way, but we won't go into that. You know, why complicate things too much? Okay. But the point is the light will end up coming out as if, okay, it's being scattered from these two surfaces. Because there's electrons, and as you bring the surfaces closer and closer, it's more likely that the little stuff going through is going to hit the electrons, right? Yeah, any idiot could figure that part out, right? The smaller I make this opening, the more likely it is the photon is going to have an encounter with the surface. Alright. It would be okay, as you suggest, the slit seems reasonable. I don't know what that means. If you would be, if you, that is if, right? I mean, yeah, if you would, by drawing, if you would be inclined, I can draw what I think you're suggesting. And again, it doesn't matter what I'm suggesting. What I'm saying overtly is I show you a clip of an MIT professor looking at one thing, staring right at it, and not describing it as what it is. Not accounting for what it looks like, because it doesn't fit his math. So he just denies the existence of the pattern. Alright. But I'm unsure about some specifics, and I'm lazy. So yeah, fuck me. Okay, well, you concede. Useless. P.S. Where's my attendance lapel pin? Okay, jokester. You know how much I love jokes, right? I've been watching the mail. Better than average show today. That's the best you could do as a contribution. Well, it sucked. Alright. Brace for impact. Another what the fuck screen name. Don't you think we've done enough double slit stuff for now? Well, I'm in 2 weeks going to be doing a debate, okay, where people actually have to answer my questions. So when I say something like, well, how come there's two wave functions in the single slit, but only two wave functions in the double slit? How does that work? How does this make two wave functions and this only makes two wave functions when there's two freaking openings now? Simple questions like that, and we'll see if we can get any kind of answer to the questions. So that's going to be a big event. As I already pointed out, this is quantum mechanics. This is the origin. Quantum mechanics, in all likelihood, wouldn't exist if it wasn't for this stupid experiment. And the fact that they mischaracterized it. Okay, clearly you don't have a good explanation, except the one that works and fits exactly the outcome. So again, let's just do it one more time, right? I mean, he says this isn't a good explanation. So electrons being what the actual photons will be encountering when there's a slit, right? When there's a slit, the electrons are what the photon is actually interacting with, right? No, I have to explain that. But again, it just all fits right in here. So I can make my little two-slit experiment, okay? And the fact is that this distance has a certain number of wavelengths in it, and that will decide the big envelope pattern, okay? And this distance, okay, by scatter, by the mathematics, works just fine. This math works, okay? From this distance, there's a whole bunch of wavelengths in here, and that creates the little blocks. And you see a photon where the two line up. And where the two don't line up, you don't see a photon. So, there you go. There's your explanation of the real pattern. Why there's a little hole there, right? Why this is here is because this is this, and that's where there is a block from here, a contribution from here, but there's no contribution from here. So these surfaces were out of phase. This one was not in phase with this one. So the light coming from these surfaces was out of phase with these surfaces. And that's what creates this, because this is only getting a half contribution. See, this gets a half from here and gets a half from here, and that equals a whole, and so there's photon. And the place where only one of them is, no photon. And also for these dark spots, right? There's dark spots here. It's because there's only one half of a contribution from here, but no contribution from there. So he says, you don't have a good explanation. So this isn't a good explanation. Even though it works perfectly, nobody's said how it's in any way flawed as an explanation, that somehow that doesn't make sense or it doesn't work. There's a whole front and harder guy named after this, this math is named after this math that actually works. But that's not a good explanation. And really, my only addition, right, is the fact that I'm just saying, obviously, you have to look at it on an arced surface. Obviously. If you want to see what it's actually doing, you want to see it accurately, because this stuff, is deceptive. You won't see it. You won't see the pattern because you've gone too far away. The photons are spreading over too much surface, and you won't see anything. But if you do it this way, you'll see so much more, and you'll see it accurately. That's not even a contribution. You don't even see that as a contribution to this conversation, is to point out, well, you really have to view the movie. Let's say you made a really widescreen movie, 40 degree, kind of projection, big widescreen movie. You would just say, no, just put it on a flat screen, it's fine, it'll work out just fine. So even though everything's getting way stretched over here, right, all the proportions are getting way distorted, you'd say that's being a good movie producer. You wouldn't understand that you've got to arc the screen so the viewers can see it right, in the right proportion. So even pointing out that is nothing to you. What can I say? You are an asshole. okay? A fucking unaccountable, trolling douchebag asshole. Because you're not going to make any counter response to explain why that's nothing. I don't get to interrogate you like I will be in a couple of weeks. Let's see. Clearly you don't have a good explanation. But if you ignore it and change the subject, maybe nobody will notice. So I'm the one ignoring facts and changing the subject when I just showed Professor Lewin looking at the pattern and pretending it wasn't the same pattern. He was calling the dinosaur head, it's just a rock. Unremarkable. It's an unremarkable rock. God, you people suck. Alright. You've done what? Thousands of videos on the double slit? No, hundreds. Now, you complain that you have to explain your dumb box thing. So the box thing doesn't have anything to do with the double slit. Multiple times because it's incomprehensible BS. Okay, so in your honor, I'll explain it again. Now, I don't think this is incomprehensible at all. But what I have stated is that physics doesn't even bother exploring alternative mechanisms for the source of momentum in the universe. So, this is a kind of a thought experiment. Things like Einstein used, lots of Bohr, all these people use thought experiments all the time. Drawings and ideas. So I gave you a simple thought experiment that you create a little a device, a box, and it has no friction, so it can move without friction, and whatever energy goes into it has no friction. And the first piece of energy that goes in goes this way, and when it hits the surface, every time it hits a surface, it imposes momentum, and every time, but it reflects. So it never loses its energy. It just imparts energy on the other surface. So if we did that theoretically, what would happen? Well, when the energy hit the front surface, it would move the box forward. And then as the energy reflects and is moving this way, the box is moving forward. But when the energy hits the back surface, the box will stop. It won't go backwards, right? It'll just stop. It'll undo the first piece of momentum. And then so the box is stopped, and then this reflects, and now the box is going to start again, and the box will move, and then this reflection comes back and it hits the back of the box, and the box will stop again. And this is a model for momentum, that we could imagine that if there were two electrons, that they might be in the same circumstance, that energy would get caught between them in an initial state. Let's draw it more precisely. So energy comes in and hits an electron, and now the electron gets momentum this way and starts moving this way. This reflects, okay, and the energy is coming back. And while that's happening, another electron pops into this place. So now the reflection will hit another electron. Okay, so you can understand that now we're starting to make the box, maybe. And now this electron reflects the light back. Okay, but because these two electrons are now moving in opposite directions, they're moving into more force. So because they're moving into the field, they're moving into more things they're going to hit. So just as I made the argument with light, if I move away at the speed of light, I become invisible. Nothing reflects off me anymore. If I move towards you at the speed of light, then I'm going to be very, very solid. And so the same thing would be happening here. Drag, okay, would stop the box, the electron. And again, then it would be initiated again, though, because this reflection will finally hit it and also hit it again this way. And this one will be hit again this way, and it'll drag to a stop. And that's a mechanism. So these are things that could be running what happens to something when you throw it into space. That this kind of mechanism would explain why there's such a thing as a muon. And you're just saying, no, I won't even engage in the conversation of discussing any alternatives. Dumb box thing multiple times because it's incomprehensible BS. So that's incomprehensible to who? You know, the ping pong paddle analogy is incomprehensible. That you could understand if I could make perfectly frictionless ping pong ball, one that never lost energy, and the paddles, each time the ball hit, they got real momentum. You could understand that, you know, the closer I bring the paddles, the more pressure I create pushing out, and that I would have to have force pushing from the outside to ever push them together, because there's more force between them as I push them together. That's incomprehensible BS. Okay. But then go on to make thousands of videos saying the same thing for an hour. It doesn't get any more stupid, and yet you're here commenting. Yeah. Clearly this threatens you in some way. That's the real issue. Why are you threatened by this alternative theory? Could it just be that, okay, you're 30 years old and you wasted 10 years of your life believing bullshit, and that's embarrassing. You were duped by all of these, Brian Greens and Degrassi Tysons and all these famous people because, they told you a silly story and you fell for it, and so you're embarrassed. Or are you just a religious nut? You want the universe to be a silly place. What's the answer? Because this isn't an accurate characterization, so I'm just pointing out, right? I show Professor Lewin can't accurately describe a pattern. You can't accurately describe my videos. So you're all just liars, right? I mean, when do we get to say you're just a liar? That this characterization is so far from the truth. You haven't counter-argued any of this stuff. You haven't explained how any of it's wrong or incorrect or can't be. Nothing. Nothing but this snarky crap. Alright, so it's just an example of exactly what the fight is about, which is human character. Apparently most humans are just lying sacks of dirty, smelly shit. Alright, so fuck off. Alright. That's it. That's the comments for the day. So maybe we'll do some more Professor Lewin. I mean, we can do this alcoholic guy doing the ether Michelson-Morley experiment. Or we can do some Professor Lewin. So this is Professor Lewin's next lecture where he's talking about multiple slits. So I guess I'll just drive home the point by playing this.
So last time, we discussed the interference patterns due to two coherent light sources. Today I will expand on this by exploring many, many light sources. Suppose instead of having two slits through which I allow the light to go, I have many. I have N, capital N.
Right, and we know that capital N has a limit. So they just make it N like infinity. Like N could be any number. And of course, it won't be any number. It'll be a specific amount of numbers. So we'll draw it his way, and I'll just point out sort of obvious things, Okay, so we have multiple impediments, you could just say, however you want to look at it. And so continue.
And let the separation between two adjacent ones be D. And so plane parallel waves come in, and each one of these light sources is going to be a Huygens source. You're going to put.
So he again, the distance is the distance between the two surfaces. So just understand this again. The mathematics, the thing they use in the math is the distance between the two surfaces. It's not the wave center. So any place that would be a possible wave center, okay, that's not the point being used. They're not using this distance to the wave center. So it's I mean, obviously they're using the surfaces as the mathematical point, the point where you draw your two lines of comparison. You draw them from the sources. These are the sources. The surfaces are the sources. There, where they're making the comparison from. They're not making the comparison from where the two wave centers would be. Okay, that would be 1/2 d. Okay, they don't do a 1/2 d.
Do spherical waves. And so now we can ask ourselves the same question that we did before, and that is, look at a long distance far away at certain angle theta, where will we see maxima and where will we see minima? And then we can put up here a screen at a distance L, and we will call this x equals 0, and then we can even ask the question, where exactly on that screen will we see these maxima? You will have constructive interference, exactly the same situation that we had with the double slit interference pattern, when the sine of theta of n equals n lambda divided by d.
So again, it's just n, which is the number of the slit, right? So that's the n number is counting, all right, how many slits you are away. So it's telling you how far you're making your comparison, the n. So the n isn't just counting the number of slits, it's counting essentially distance. So when you change n from 1 slit to 2 slits, right, you're doing 2n. So you're putting a 2 in the equation, or a 4, or a 5. So depending on how many of these things you make, you're increasing the d. So even though the d's in the denominator, you're really multiplying the n times the d and dividing it by the wavelength.
And if you're dealing with very small angles theta, you should all remember that the sine of an angle is the same as the angle itself, provided that you work in radians.
Right, and we know that this whole angle conversation can be all solved by just understanding, well, let's draw the angles. Let's draw the sphere, okay, that would be what you would dissect into radians. And that, yes, there'll be a certain number of these little places where you can have a wavelength of difference between this point and this point. This point and this point have a finite number of places. There's a finite number because this length of this line, okay, understand when they're both pointing this way, okay, these two lines will have the same, obviously my circle is not very symmetrical. These 2 points, should be bigger here. But anyway, okay, these 2 points, all right, will be the same distance. And obviously when they're this way, though, these 2 points will be substantially different. So the maximum difference is here in terms of how different the length of these 2 lines will be, and it goes to 0. So that's it. There's a finite number of potential spots where you have a full wavelength of change in the distance between these 2 lines. And so that's all you're saying. You're saying how many wavelengths are in this distance, and every one of those will be reflected at a point here. And that's defining the experiment. But he doesn't draw this, because this isn't what waves do. This is what diffracted light does. This is a particle theory explanation that works better and is more complete and explains everything you see. But they're going to say they have this is nail in the coffin evidence that a particle fails as an explanation and waves win. Even though it's exactly the opposite. It's slam dunk evidence that it's a particle. A composite particle that you break into pieces and that you just recombine the pieces. There's no interference anywhere.
So for small angles, you can always use this approximation. Remember that it is in radians, and that's only...
So remember, radians just means a percentage of this arc.
Then the small angle approximation. And so the conclusion then is, if we work in radians for now, that theta of n for the maxima is then an n lambda divided by d, and being 0 right here, and being 1 right here, and being 2 right there.
So he just converted, right? So just as I stated, it's just going to be the wavelength is defining, how the number of wavelengths is defining how many are in the distance. Right there is basically what he's saying. And all you do is multiply the n number and you make the number of wavelengths more wavelengths. So he's really is saying, he's not saying n is the number of things, he's really saying n is the expansion of the distance. So if you expand the distance all the way, you'll get the smallest grain, and again, the whole point is there's all these point sources are making a contribution. So in the end, you're just going to be combining the pattern from here to here with the pattern from here to here, which will stack on top of that, and then the pattern from here to here will stack on top of that, and the pattern from here to here will stack on top of that. And when you have all these contributing, you'll get a spot you can see, and the rest of the places they'll all be out of phase to some point, or to some in some respect or another. So they'll be all out of phase in all these points, and there'll be only certain places where they're really in phase. A few of them could be in phase here, and you get a little tiny one, a little tiny one, a little tiny one. Then you'll get a big one again, where they're all when they're all harmonic, when they're all re-establish the pattern, and it's inevitable that they re-establish the pattern where they're all in phase.
And if you want to express that in terms of a linear displacement from 0, then x of n, again, for small angles, is L times that number. So you will say, well, big deal. It's the same result that we had for the double slit interferometer. We had exactly the same equation. There was no...
Right, and we know that equation, this, doesn't explain the dead spots. So it has no component in it that explains this predicts the wrong pattern. So the math he's using doesn't create the two slit pattern. So when he uses that simplification math, he's not going to get the right answer. All right, it won't be the double slit pattern. It won't accurately represent it. He's giving you mathematics that creates this. Okay, and we know the actual pattern is this. Okay, so, well, you can sort of see, I mean, this is the important part here. So we know this is the real pattern. He mathematically explains this pattern. And that's all okay. That's good physics. That's good science. Do math that predicts the wrong pattern, and then say how perfect your math is, how great it is, how you figured it all out, and you're not even predicting the right pattern. They say it's the most predictive theory in the history of mankind. Well, that's why it's the most predictive theory, because it never has to actually predict the actual results, because they never account for the actual experimental result.
difference. And D now is the separation between two sources here. It is obvious that it is the same, because if these two are constructively interfering, then these two will too, and these two will too, and these two will...
So none of that happens, right? The math isn't saying that. No, the math is saying the two closest ones, then the two further away ones, then the ones even further away. You're doing 1n, 2n, 3n. You're not doing 1n, 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 okay? You're multiplying it. You're making the distance bigger and bigger. You're not doing the same distance in different locations. So that's bullshit.
So all of them will. So it's not too surprising that you get exactly the same result. But now comes the big surprise. We haven't discussed yet the issue where the locations are, where light plus light gives darkness. We haven't discussed the destructive interference. And to the...
Well, yes, well, see, this is the tricky part, right? Because, you know, as you use a diffraction gradient, this pattern gets even more eccentric in the sense that you get a spot here, and then you get almost nothing, and then you get a spot, and you get and then you get a spot. All right, and these spots will be much, much bigger than these little ones here. You know. Well, the separation will be right, so it won't matter. These spots will be so faint, but the distance will still be the same distance, so I shouldn't imply that. But the point is that there'll be a smaller on-off pattern in here, okay? But you won't be able to see it. There won't be enough photons. It'll be invisible. So it's like having this pattern, except these X's go a lot farther. Okay, so you have a lot of X's. And then you get another spot, you know, where it's on. And the spots where it's on get smaller and smaller. But that's just because you've stacked. Again, I'll point it out again. You're just stacking, okay, the distance things. So you're doing this distance, and then you're doing this distance, and then you're doing this distance. And you can sort of understand as I'm if I'm making the distance bigger, I'm doing exactly the opposite with the pattern. The little block creates a big block. This block creates a little smaller block. This block creates a little smaller block. This block creates a little smaller block. And obviously in the center, I'll always have that. And then at certain other locations, I'll also recreate that same exact stacking, where they'll all be on top of each other. And that's the pattern that's repeating. There's still plenty of crap hitting here. It's just this is the only place where they all stack up. There's lots of places where you might have two of them be on top of each other. This one and this one will line up, you know, and this one. But it won't be enough photons to create a photon. There won't be enough pieces. So only in the 6 or 7 locations will you get where they all line up, where they're all in phase.
Derive that properly is very tricky. In fact, if you take 803, you will see a perfect derivation. But I will give you
Won't be perfect.
the results. What is not so intuitive, that if you have n sources, that between two major maxima, that means between this maximum at n equals...
Well, let's say it will be perfect, but it'll be using this math. No, that's not it. It'll be using this math? Yeah. No, that's not it either. It'll be using this math. No, that's not it either. This must be it here. I've collected a lot of crap here. This math. No, that's the Hubble constant. No, that's not it either. Well, anyway. It's different math. It's math that's using, for the double slit, 4-point source math. 4-wave math. Alright, and the waves have their centers on the surfaces, meaning half the wave has to be over the surface, which doesn't make any sense. Like the single impediment has half of the waves somehow created through the surfaces, which would be impossible for real waves.
0 and a maximum at n equals 1, there are now n, capital N, minus 1 minima. And minima means complete destructive interference. So if capital N is 2, which we did last time, 2 minus 1 is 1. Exactly, that was correct. We had only 1, 0 in between the two maxima. But that's not...
And if it's 1, then it's 1 minus 1 and 0, and there's no pattern, which doesn't work either.
Not the case anymore when capital N is much larger than 2. And so let me now make you a sketch whereby I plot the intensity of the light as a function of angle theta. And this is the intensity, so that's in watts per square meter. Remember, that's the pointing vector. And let this...
So this is just drawing it as if it was an electromagnetic wave of some kind, if this was an amplitude in the electric field or some kind of horseshit like that, when really the amplitude is just going to be the number of photons.
Be 0, and let the angle theta 1 be here. And for small angles then, that's lambda divided by d. And here you have theta 2, which is 2 lambda divided by d, and so on. I take the small angle approximation, so this angle is now in radians.
Right, so he's just going to, well, we'll let him draw it, and we'll sew this up.
What you're going to see now is the following intensity as a function of theta. You see here a peak, and you're going to see here a peak, and you're going to see here one, and so on. And the same, of course, is true on the other side. And here in between, you're going to see now n minus 1 locations whereby you have total destructive interference. And the same is...
So obviously you have some constructive interference between those, right? So any idiot could figure out you just drew a line that had a lump in it, right? So obviously there was some constructive and then destructive, and then some constructive and then destructive. So you can't have one without the other, so to speak, and create a pattern. You have to have an X and then a 0 and an X and a 0. You can't have a nothing.
The case here. And this can be huge, and can be a few hundred. So you have many, many locations where you have 100% destructive interference.
All right, so yes, he says the words 100%, but is it ever? And secondly, obviously these little humps are also just like these humps, except they're just lower intensity. So the real pattern, the smallest pattern, is really doing this frequency. That's what the n number, the total number would give you is this many little bars, but the little bars don't have enough other bars stacked. They're not in sequence with the other full wavelength difference. They're not in phase with enough of the other contributors, so you get very little light. And it's only when all the sources, all the surfaces are in phase that you get the big bar.
Now this point, this first location where we hit the 0, that now is at the position lambda divided by d divided by capital N. And I will call that angle from the maximum to that 0, from this maximum to this 0, I will call that angle for now.
So again, you just see it. Okay, that was enough. We've been over it. All there is the wavelength, the d distance, which is, again, times n, which so you're just saying 1d distance, 2d distances, 3d distances, right? So it's not that complicated. Just divide into the wavelength. So again, it's, anyway. So enough, I think. Let's see what else. I don't think he gets into anything else that's spectacularly relevant. I mean, the clip I'll probably play is, maybe we'll go back to where he's describing the single slit, and because that one's kind of funny, just because he makes a speech about how there's no such thing as diffraction. So anyway, so yeah, then he just does the color separation. Obviously, the different wavelengths of light will show up differently on this pattern, because the number of wavelengths is deciding how much of the arc you get to consume. The more wavelengths that fit, the more bars you're going to create. The more segments of the 90 degrees you consume. Alright, the smaller the wavelength. Small wavelength, then lots of them fit in the d distance. The more that fit in the d distance, the more pieces of the arc have to be, it has to be segmented into. Alright, broken into pieces, how you want to describe that. Alright, so enough of the video. We won't bother with the interferometer stuff. So yeah, I might not make a video for a while. Depends on if there's anything relevant shows up, more relevant. And I'll just work on my presentation videos for the debate, and leave it at that. And such. I mean, I want to give them all the questions I'm going to ask, and I'm going to give them all of the material I intend to use as part of my argument ahead of time, so they can actually come up with a counter argument. Yes. I don't want there to be any arguments about what data exists, what experiments have been done, all that crap. I want all those answers, all those questions to be answered ahead of time, so there's no running away from the subject by saying, well, what about this experiment, or what about that experiment, or what about Professor so-and-so, what about this video? None of that crap should be a surprise where you have to say, well, I didn't see that, so I can't say. None of those kind of excuses. Alright, anyway, so till the next time, and such, and so forth and whatnot. But it does seem that there's just no will for people to have a rational conversation. They won't concede anything. Again, I've been asking for years, and not one single commenter has said, yes, their evidence is very weak considering their confidence. Just something like that. Nothing. No concession to how bad their evidence is.